Welcome one, welcome all. Welcome to another exciting episode of Tales of Citizens right here on the Sound Strategy Network. I am Bridger. I'll be your host for today as we dive into the deep questions. Today we've got a discussion about the Endeavor and the associated design document recently released by CIG. And to join us to discuss that is my good friend Mr. Tim Young, the astrophysicist from Down Under. Welcome, sir.
Morning. Or at least from here.
I guess it would be, wouldn't it? Yes. You're a good, 12 hours ahead of us, thereabouts?
Yeah. We're a +8, so... Oh, sorry, -8.
-8, we're minus... You can't be minus, we're minus.
No, so we are +8. I got this, it's fine. It's early. Come on.
Where's your coffee? Let's get down to brass tacks here. The last week has been filled with all kinds of drama surrounding a specific article on The Escapist. I don't want to talk about it at all. It is what it is. It has nothing to do with enjoying the game. So we're here to talk about the game. I just want to get that out there and off the table. We're not talking about the article. We're not talking about anything related to it. It's being handled by other people. We don't need to care. But what we can be talking about is our Life in the Verse segment, what we've been doing while we're waiting to play Star Citizen and or playing Star Citizen in the Arena Commander. What have you been up to, Tim? What have you been up to recently? Gaming related or sci-fi related or anything kind of enjoyable?
Yeah, I occasionally do enjoyable things. It's good. We recently actually just got the announcement that we will be presenting at PAX Australia 2015 for the second year in a row now.
Yes, that's right. I remember you did that the first time, and it was very successful.
Yeah, it was a fantastic panel last year. So if you guys or anyone is coming down to PAX Australia this year, be sure to check us out on tentatively scheduled for the Saturday at 6 p.m. in the Drop Air Theatre. But we're going to be talking about a very appropriate topic, which is the science versus video games, looking at when science helps and when it hinders a story, when you should be applying suspension of disbelief, and also the way that science sort of underpins our understanding of everyday life in ways that we might not necessarily understand or appreciate.
All right, excellent. That's great to hear. So anybody going to PAX Aus can be looking forward to that. What I've been doing recently is getting right back into Guild Wars 2. It's very interesting. I don't know if you ever played Guild Wars 2 in the past, Tim?
Oh, tons.
Yeah?
Yeah.
The expansion's coming out this month, and a bunch of people from T Legacy was like, hey, should we do this again? Because it was fun back in the day. And we're like, okay. And I have been every once in a while poking my head in to see what recent patch notes for Guild Wars 2 have said, hoping to see some like major overhaul of World versus World that may have made it more interesting and enjoyable, since that was the thing that I liked the most about the game, but it had a lot of problems that were never fixed. And I'm like, nope, not this year. Nope, not this year. And this time I was like, the expansion's coming out and they're highlighting all these things like, oh, you can get these new mastery systems and this new specialization and this new class. And I'm like, okay, guild halls, okay, structured PvP mode, that's pretty cool. And then finally, they're like, and we've completely redone the maps and completely redone the supply system and the upgrade system and all this stuff. And I'm like, finally! Holy crap! I've been waiting for 3 years for this thing to get any attention at all. And the only thing they've done in the entire time is eliminate culling. And while that was a very important piece, okay, I'm going to stop now because this is not Tales of Citizens, or it's not Tales of Tyria. But, I tell you what, it will be. That's right. I'm bringing Tales of Tyria back for a limited run. Don't know how limited, but I know it's going to happen, and it's going to start next week on the 11th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So if you guys want to watch that, looking forward to it. So let's move on to Star Citizen stuff. Since that's what we're here for, let's talk about the Endeavor. Now, first question, Tim. I know you have quite a fleet. Did you melt some stuff to get an Endeavor?
No, I've decided the Endeavor is going to be my first sort of in-game goal. I do have a really unsettling amount of ships in my hangar at the moment. It's just one of those things that it creeps up on you, and then you're like, oh, wait, what am I doing with my life? But no, the Endeavors, it looks like a fantastic ship. I'm really excited about it. A lot of the concepts that they sort of broached in the article describing how that whole system is going to be working look fantastic. So definitely be one of the first things we or certainly we start working towards getting.
Yeah, I was really surprised by the sort of customizability of it at this concept stage. I was kind of expecting it to be this thing and then them to say some hand waving, we'll work on making this customizable in the future, blah, blah, blah. But they already, I mean, they're selling specific pods for it and everything. That was very surprising to me. But obviously a good surprise because it means they're thinking about this stuff ahead of time. I also really like this, but this looks like a very expensive ship, in game or out of game. It's almost the size of an Idris, really. It's double the size of a Starfarer. It's going to be a pretty significant purchase within the game, I'm sure.
Let's face it, that when it's in like its sort of prototyping concept art stages, by the time it actually hits Greybox, it'll be at least the size of an Idris, possibly bigger at this rate.
Right? I mean, if you look at this ship, let me pull this up here, because if you look at this ship, you're looking at this thing and you're like, oh, the front part is the cockpit. And then you realize, oh no, that little tiny windshield of it is actually the cockpit. Like, the front neck of the ship is the size of a constellation almost. It's ridiculous. So, yeah.
She looks pretty, either way.
It's definitely really nice looking. I like the MISC designs for sure. Although it does have those weird let's block your vision with these struts. Even in the concept version. MISC is not a fan of vision.
And that strut's got to go somewhere.
Yeah. So anyway, we're looking at this, and it's a fairly expensive ship, obviously, and it's got a lot of interesting modularity. So let's talk about that. The pieces in the middle, here's what I noticed. You've got these three sort of attachers in the middle, obviously 2 on each side. And then the nose of the ship, the whole front section of the ship is actually its own independent ship that can go around and collect data or go through hazardous environments, et cetera, et cetera. That's all in the article. But I noticed that you've got these 2 things on the front of it. Are those thrusters on the very front?
I think they're going to be maneuvering thrusters.
Because it's so long, you're going to need... Yeah.
Yeah, the moment of torque you're going to get when you try and turn that thing around, you're just going to need a huge amount of thrust and just applied across the entire length of the ship.
Yeah, I have to imagine, because they've already stated that the back end, when it's not connected to the main sort of driver end, is not going to be able to go anywhere on its own except straight forward. Like, it doesn't have maneuvering thrusters.
It's largely immobile.
I'm sure there are maneuvering thrusters in the back, but they're not designed to work without that front section. So that's really interesting. So what else do I have on my sheet here? There's a lot of interesting questions this raises. So I like the detachable cab, but the first thing this made me think, okay, it's a science vessel with a detachable cab, and the first thing I thought of was the trailers in The Lost World.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if that makes me too big of a nerd, but not the movie, because the movie was crappy. Let's ignore the movie. The book was fantastic. So that's the first thing I thought of. But it also kind of like, I also imagined like the trailers from Tornado Chasers, like science people are just like, because it says it's a detachable cab, so immediately I thought like a pickup truck cab or like a tractor trailer cab.
My first thought was Optimus Prime.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, science trailer with a detachable exploration unit.
I like it. So, okay, so let's talk about the different things that we can attach to it. The way that they've created the modularity is very interesting. You have these 3 sort of connectors on each side, and they will allow you to sort of hang things off the side or underneath it. And the telescope array was the first thing that caught my eye. I like the sort of concept of the gameplay, like this thing is used to scan down and find your salvage and your anomalies and different interesting things that you can then sell for money later. So that one was the first one that appealed to me. When you're looking at these pods and stuff, what is the first thing that you say, oh man, if I get this, I gotta have that?
So, I mean, conceptually wise, the telescope was the first thing I saw as well, and I thought that looks phenomenal. The design of the telescope is very JWST as well, which is the James Webb Space Telescope, a telescope that's sort of designed to replace Hubble. And there we go. That big folding hexagonal mirror system is exactly the same thing that we're using for JWST. But then I thought, how is that in an age of spaceships? Do we need a big telescope like that? Can't we just go there?
Well, it's designed to scan within a solar system, I think, to find very small anomalies, like maybe small ships and things that you can't find otherwise.
As a survey tool, I totally agree. But then also a telescope with that kind of aperture for survey is not the kind of telescope that you would normally use. Usually,
I
you would
get the
use a
impression that this is not just for visual; it's for like all the entire electromagnetic spectrum scanning, right? So maybe that
Oh
makes
yeah, even
sense.
then though, I mean, so we have the building a big telescope in Australia at the moment called the SK, or the Square Kilometre Array. I don't know if that's made it into the news elsewhere in the world. Hopefully it should, because it's the largest telescope project in the world. This thing has baselines that cover literally thousands of kilometers. And if you actually have a look at the survey end of the telescope, this survey system that we call the MWA, or the Murchison Wide Field Array, it looks like a series of coat hangers that someone stuck upside down on the ground. Like, it does not look like a conventional telescope, and that's because when you're doing survey work, you're using different wavelengths, and you're also using electronic steering rather than physical steering of the telescope. So rather than actually picking up the telescope and pointing it at the correct part of the sky, you actually just record everything. You record the entire sky, and if you want to look at something, you just take what you've got in your data and then steer it using the software. So you can actually refocus the telescope after you've taken the photo.
Wow. That's pretty awesome, and it's completely completely counter to the way that they are setting up the system, which if you watch the little video that they gave here in the description, the idea is you sort of choose an area of the sky and then zoom in because you think you see something, and then once you zoom in, you'll be able to tell if you actually saw something. That's in the design article that they've released.
I'm okay. Like, I can explain a lot of this stuff away in my own mind because things have to be consistent.
Head
my brain to
canon.
not explode. Yeah, exactly. The head canon is very strong with me. So, I can fully understand or explain that that's a different set of sensors that are doing the wide field survey. And then, I mean, it doesn't actually, if you look at that video really carefully, it doesn't zoom in. It's just a picture that sort of enlarges. So it could be two different feeds that are superimposed. I'm okay with that. I don't need to get bent out of shape because they're using the wrong type of telescope. And it looked cool. It looks really, really cool.
Absolutely. And I love the description that they gave, which is essentially you're looking at this large view, trying to detect anomalies that are very difficult to see and might get confused with other things, and then you zoom in order on those places, because if you stayed in the very zoomed in mode, of course you'd find anything on your screen much easier, but scanning the entire section of the sky that you're looking for that way is extremely inefficient. So they have this sort of, watch the wide one, find some anomalies, zoom in a little bit, see if they're still there, and then go in and out, trying to find the mother lode salvage ship that you're trying to find, or the anomaly that they need to document for some piece of science that you can sell the intel or the data to some large corporation or something within the game. So I like that system. That's really cool.
As when I read that, that was one of the first things that I read that I thought, oh, thank goodness, like they actually have thought this through. Because, I mean, let's face it, very rarely does CIG do something without having thought at least, one or two layers deep, right? They're pretty good at not jumping the gun and going, we're going to do this awesome thing. And then the community goes, that's entirely impossible. And CIG go, oh no, we changed our minds now. Like, they're pretty good at actually thinking these things through before they just jump the gun and start posting things out and saying, hey, this is how this is done.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I thought of when I saw these like domes with agriculture in them, and it describes how you could like sell the crops for money, I just imagine somebody planting this thing by a star and just making money. It just prints money for them and they never come back to it. And I'm like, well, that doesn't sound very good. And then they go into the article and they explain, oh no, there's this whole like discovery process of trying to figure out, what type of fertilizer you use and how much water and what kind of solar radiation do you use, and all of those sort of pieces. This is almost like a crafting system in another MMO where you're trying to, make the biggest harvest with the correct set of ingredients, and you kind of have to do some things manually and some things have to be figured out, especially for vegetation that is not something that people know about. Like, right, so if you put a potato field in there, you probably already know, like, that's going to be documented. Like, yes, but then you're going to make zero profit on it because everybody else knows how to make potatoes perfectly well, and this is not necessarily a good environment for them. But the more esoteric stuff requires maybe special ingredients you can only get in certain worlds, or you need to be near a certain star or something to that effect. So that sounds really cool too.
Yeah, and so one of the cool things I said there was that different types of radiation will affect the growth in different ways. It's such a simple thing, but if they do this, they need to actually think about the color of the plant that they're putting in. So the
Ooh.
reason that we have green plants on our planet is because of the particular frequency of light that is dominant from our sun. And so what you want to do is you want to absorb all the other colors except for the green, which gets reflected, and that's why we see it as
I
being green.
thought that's backwards though. That's complete because our sun, the biggest, brightest frequency that our sun puts out light on is the green spectrum, and that's why it's unusual that plants reflect green light and absorb the other light. That is what I remember
as a
hearing.
peak output, yes, but you got to think about the aggregate. So it's the integral under the curve. So you're looking at a black body radiation plot, and the amount of area underneath the plot is much larger than you expect when you just look at peak values as well. It is a little counterintuitive, but the math does check out.
Gotcha.
I
Okay.
promise you, 4 billion years of evolution has got it correct.
Well, right, but maybe there's only one, or maybe there are only very few different ways that you can photosynthesize things, and
Well, we do see differences on our planet in the first place. I mean, we do see different altitudes of plants that have different amounts of protection from, like, for example, ultraviolet radiation can handle that differently. And we also see the same thing in not just in plants, but in bacteria and like extremophiles. The way that they build themselves to handle different types of radiation happens down here as well. So there is a range,
well,
definitely.
sure, but my understanding is that chloroform is still the thing that is used in every photosynthesis on
Chlorophyll.
or chlorophyll. Sorry, chloroform.
What have you been getting up to?
Actually, no. Another piece that I heard was debunking the fact that chloroform will not put you to sleep in like 2 seconds. It literally takes about 2 minutes of breathing chloroform before you're asleep. That screws up every plot of every like detective show or any other show where they have to knock somebody out. Oh, we got some chloroform here. So yes, chlorophyll. Sorry, chlorophyll. Is green. That's just what it looks like, and it's in every photosynthetic plant on Earth, as I understand it, or photosynthetic life form that we have. So evolution never found, at least on our planet, another way, another more efficient way than chlorophyll to do it with
Well,
our star.
it might have, but again, 4 billion years of evolution, like those other ones that were just less efficient,
Right. That's why I qualified myself to
select
say
against.
more efficient than what we currently have.
Yeah.
But you're right. There could be other stars that put out a lot more red light and a lot less of what chlorophyll normally is able to absorb. And I'm just talking backwards here because I don't know exactly which it's best able to absorb. But you're right. There could be other plants that are different colors because of that.
If you expect the frequency to be a lot more dominant in the lower end of the spectrum, like red, you would expect a more bluer plant, for example, because it's going to want to absorb all that red, get that energy in, and then the blue that's sort of there's not that much of it there, that gets reflected back out. But again, we also need to think about what our eyes see in terms of the actual photoreceptors and the frequencies that our eyes can deal with. Like if we could see infrared or ultraviolet, things look very different. If you take an infrared camera, in fact, if you just go into Google and just search infrared photography, you'll see the world looks very different. And one thing that's different is that trees look really white and ghostly. So there are infrared wavelengths that the trees aren't taking in. They're reflecting it back out, and that's why they're white and infrared.
Interesting.
So it's really difficult to sort of break down the misconceptions that we just intrinsically have as human beings because of the weird way in which we actually visually see the world.
Right. And some people in the chat are saying you could plant cornfields in a biome and then fly close to a star and then have tasty popcorn. Your biome just starts getting filled with popcorn. You're like, oh god, it's gonna burst! Get out of here! I don't.
But then you're gonna need the buttercrop as well. So
The buttercrop, yes, that's one thing. We're going to have space farming, but we're not going to have space cowboys because there's no mention of livestock here, which is
not
disappointing.
yet. And that's the other thing I think as well. So they quite, obviously state that the types of things you're going to be growing in these agropods are not going to be bulk, wheat fields or huge amounts of.
They're going to be specialty things.
Bulk. Yeah, and so food is that we eat in terms of meats. That's going to be an agriculture planet type thing. we have Wagyu beef here on Earth, so maybe we've got some Wagyu equivalent of special space meat that's carefully cultivated, one cow at a time.
Cows taste better when they're grown in zero gravity. I don't think that's
Well,
how
I
that
guess you
works.
could possibly get a more spherical cow.
All right, so I was continuing on and reading, and it just stopped immediately when I saw this, and I was like, well, that's interesting. I wonder why they needed this rotating wheel thing. And then they're like, oh yeah, this is a super collider. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. You don't just put that on a ship. You don't just put that anywhere. I have it on good authority that super colliders are very delicate pieces of equipment. Okay, but I guess this allows you to tweak your guns to go a little faster or something.
Yeah, I think they've gone the Iron Man route with that, where I think was it in 2 or 3 where Tony builds a small particle accelerator in his basement and then uses a lever to beam something onto a crystal.
I don't know. You're right though. It's like an extremis extremis thing here. The the thought of putting any kind of particle accelerator on a ship is a little bit weird. But making one this small, I mean, usually the reason that they're circular, well, actually that has nothing to do with their size. But the fact is, the super collider we were going to put in the superconducting super collider that we were going to build in Texas was going to be like the size of a city in
Yeah, these things are
circumference.
normally very, very large. Yeah. Well, one of the reasons for that is because you need to worry about things like the curvature, so the actual radius and the rate at which the particles that are being accelerated have to turn.
Yeah.
You also have to look at the magnetic moments that are going to be created with any rotating electrical field like that. So there are other reasons why you have to build it big in terms of like a very, very large accelerator like that. But again, 100 years in the future, space travel is trivial now. I'm okay with a smaller
They
circular
figured something out, some
reactor.
kind of stabilization field, or maybe Time Lord technology,
And
made
you know
it
what?
bigger on the inside.
Yeah, whatever anti-gravity slash gravity generating process we have, again, there's no reason why you couldn't just say, oh well, we've bent space-time inside the the particle
Sure.
accelerator.
So now let's move on to sort of the design article that was talking about this. And this is a really interesting aspect to it is, of course, this is a lot of this is non-combat type stuff where they describe, people going on science type missions and making money in the universe because they're finding data, or they're finding salvage, or they're finding anomalies that can be sold. And this is sort of an exploration and research vessel. And then they get to the part where they talk about the medical module, and you're like, well, that's interesting. And they specifically seem to say, okay, this is like a spawn point for players. It's a mobile spawn point. So in large fleets, this thing is going to be necessary. And now you've gotten the attention of a lot of combat pilots like, whoa, hey, okay, what did you say? I was going to ignore this entirely, but now what's that about a spawn point? And this is also interesting. If you know, I can see like inside information being super important. Like, that some big fight is about to happen in a specific place, and you're the only one that parks your Endeavor there, and all these people are getting blown up, and they either have a choice of spawning light years and light years away, or in your ship, and you're like, that'll be 25,000 credits. And they're like, whoa, wait a minute, highway robbery. He's like, yep, sure is. Shouldn't have broadcast that in clear text that you were meeting here to fight.
Yeah,
But I don't know who does
yeah.
that.
So I mean, it's not again. The talk of the Hope class Endeavour has been in the lore for quite some time now. So we did know that the hospital ship was coming, and we did know that it was going to be this ship specifically. And again, with the mobile spawn thing, we've known in very broad strokes how that's going to be working. But it is really good to see some of the more nitty gritty, finer detail about how that's going to happen. Although again, caveat emptor, because all of this will change once we
Sure.
actually start doing it in the game proper. All these things are great on paper, but they do need to be tested out. And that's why backers are testing the game early to actually get a feel for how this is going to work. So I have no doubt for the first couple of months that you can use the Endeavor. It's going to be wrong, and everything's going to change, and people need to keep that in mind. Don't get bent out of shape. Just let the process happen. Be part of the science, guys.
Yeah. One of the things that occurred to me is I wonder how this is going to work as far as like a mobile spawn point is concerned. I mean, could you let your NPC just park it somewhere and you just go and do your own thing and they just leave it parked there and make money for you while you're online or offline? I mean, that seems a little bit weird. Seems like everybody would have an Endeavor and they'd just be flooding the galaxy, but maybe then it would be too easy to board and take if you're not there watching it. There's all kinds of interesting. It raises a lot of interesting questions about that. Or would you literally just have to sit there with your feet up on the desk and like a tip jar and like, okay, I spawned you. Give me 5,000 credits or whatever.
Please.
Like, I'm just reading my book here. I'm doing my history homework, but I'm making some creds while I'm here.
Yeah, so I guess in the more populated areas, you're gonna have the NPC rule, like the 10 to 1, these magical 10% or 20% numbers that have been floated around. So the idea of you being the only guy with an Endeavor, or even 100 players being the ones with Endeavors, you will also have the choice of official UEE sort of Endeavor Hope class ships to spawn in. There'll also be just actual space stations and planets as well. It might be that those are way cheaper options for most players. So I think that in terms of the making like just mad cash as far as being a spawning point goes, that's going to require actually taking some risk and going out into some of the more
That's what I was
areas.
thinking. And you might need an escort of something if you don't want to get blown up and scrapped for parts by, space pirates or what have you.
And you know what? And not even necessarily other players, but just NPC,
right?
Pirates or raiders or whatever. You're going to actually have to look after one of those assets. You don't just want to find a dark corner behind some moon somewhere and park it and say, "Oh, done now." Like, things are going to spawn around you. And the GIM, the Game Instance Manager, is going to also look at where you are and say,
let's have an adventure here
for you for a long time. Yeah, well, also the GIM isn't intelligent, right? It doesn't know if you're actually at your computer or if you're off making ramen somewhere. So if it sees that you haven't done something in a long time or nothing's happened for you in a long time, it'll say, "Oh, you must be getting bored. Let's give you something fun to play with here."
The helpful like AI director, like, here, we'll spawn some pirates for you to play with.
Don't worry, we got this.
So Bill in the YouTube chat says, doesn't this take the wind out of the sails of the rescue gameplay, like with Cutlass Red and people trying to... Now, that's the good question, but it's also to be pointed out that I thought I remember one of the articles discussing how, when you die, you're not going to have to sit there in space waiting for somebody to come rescue you, because in many cases that could be an hour or a half hour or 3 hours, as many times it could be 5 minutes. And that would be a really crappy game experience if every single time you died, well, nobody would take any risks because they wouldn't want to be, not able to play for an hour. But to that end, Chris said you could just hit a button and essentially respawn somewhere else in a hospital somewhere, as long as assuming you had enough lives left. And then your body would still be out there, but it would just be like something to interact with by Cutlass Red players who are looking to make some money. And they would make a set amount of money. It wouldn't necessarily come from you. So there's a sort of a disconnect or maybe the money that you pay automatically to the hospital for spawning there goes to the Cutlass Red player for rescuing you later. And if not, it just goes out of the economy. If that's sitting out there for long enough, they have to despawn it eventually, and they just assume, okay, an NPC went and picked it up. Or if they're really cool, they'll spawn an NPC to go and pick it up, and it will add some more interactivity to the world. I could see that all working out really well.
Also, the Cutlass Red is more the ambulance rather than the hospital. So, and I don't know what it's like over in other countries like the US, but over here, certainly, our ambulances are not run by the hospital. They're a completely separate private company. So, in my mind, it makes perfect sense that the Cutlass Red owners wouldn't be the ones doing the spawning. They're the ones doing the collecting and bringing it back to your Hope class or whatever. Or, the other idea was that the Cutlass Red is the guy that saves you from having to spawn in the first place. So the Cutlass Red picks you up, and then you go, excellent, now I don't have to, get a cybernetic limb or whatever. I've been saved rather than suffering.
Well, sure, yeah, there's two different
damage.
situations. One I was thinking of is your ship was blown up and you're floating almost dead in space, and then you have to spend one of your quote-unquote lives. And another one is you successfully eject in an ejection pod or something to that nature, or You have one of the special cockpits that'll pop off and work as a lifeboat for a while. And in either of those cases, a Cutlass Red would be the kind of ship that comes to your rescue. In one situation, it brings you to a hospital, and you have to pay them for the getting you there, and then you have to pay the hospital for patching you up. In the other case, they're just like, okay, I'll leave you floating here in space, so you could pay me a few credits to bring you to the closest planet. So you pay less, assuming that you're still alive, and more if you have to go to a hospital. That makes sense, That's why you buy the ejection cockpit in the first place.
Yeah, and that's one of the big differences between, for example, like your Aurora versus your Hornet. Like the Aurora doesn't necessarily have the built-in ejection system in the cockpit because it's not a military vessel.
I can just imagine this scenario too, where you've got bounty hunters hunting you, and you manage to eject properly, and you're in some kind of nebula or something. They can't find you, but you don't want to turn on your ID beacon because then they'll more easily find you. But you're running out of oxygen, and knowing Chris Roberts, as your character runs out of oxygen, you'll hear him breathing more heavily, like, and then it's just like you're getting these little alarms going off, oxygen level low, and you're like, I can't put on the beacon. They're still nearby, but they're leaving. But I don't know how long do I have to wait until they get away? If they're out of the system, will my ID beacon still get picked up? Are they still here? It's just that's just such a crazy dramatic moment, and those kinds of things have been written about, and to have those be recreated dynamically in game is the whole point of this project, essentially.
Yeah, that whole emergent gameplay side of things is one of the things I would probably say I am the most excited for in terms of Star Citizen. Dynamic gameplay and emergent gameplay really is just phenomenal. And you get it in other games as well, like in Space Engineers, games where sandboxing is the large part of the game. Like, it's the things that aren't planned for by the developers, they're always the most fun.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the whole point of making everything work in a realistic way, is to bring out that emergent gameplay. If all your ship is a armor bar and then a health bar, and as the health goes down, something happens to your ship, some random critical means that some random engine will stop working or some random gun will stop working, it's not nearly, it won't bring out the interesting situations where your opponent, happens to disable these set of systems on purpose or by accident that cause this other really dramatic and interesting thing, an interesting choice for you to make. My shield is overloading and this is happening. Should I just shut the shield down and try to make a run for it? And all of the fact they have these pipe systems, like everything makes internal consistent sense. It's just, it's so great. And having that all in there creates those unpredictable moments where, well, the game designers didn't decide that this was an outcome that was going to happen, but it's a combination of all of these other things that creates a realistic dramatic moment or decision that you have to make. And that's exactly, you're right. Those emergent things is when you create good systems that interact in ways that make sense internally, consistently, and intuitively to the people playing / watching. Then you get a good movie / book / game / whatever. I don't think we need to.
I agree.
Yeah, I don't think we need to espouse how awesome immersion is. But let's talk about any other major thoughts here on the Endeavor and what it's sort of implying in terms of non-combat gameplay, because obviously a lot of them has been focused on combat. The other aspects we got were exploration. This is part exploration. But,
yeah.
They kind of highlight the science-y non-exploration side of this too.
Yeah, the science part of it that's not the telescope part is what's really got me interested as well. So we know, with the Super Collider, we know that that's an overclocking mechanic. And the idea behind that is that there might be some kind of mini game or some skill testing thing where you can, unlock another 0.000% on your engines or whatever that might be. But the idea, they were sort of heavily implying that science or science points might be some kind of currency in the game as well, where you can just put the ship into some, new location or some bizarre situation and then run these science experiments in these other sort of more generic modules.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a really interesting thing to me, is the idea of what that will mean in terms of being a player that's trying to do these other kinds of things. Do you go out to some badly or poorly charted nebula and just start running a generic science set of experiments and then come back trade those points in for money or for UEE, recognition or reputation. I'm really curious to see how that's going to work. And the deep dive design document is that's coming out hopefully this next week or the week after, is hopefully going to sort of espouse what that's going to be and how those things are going to work. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
I can imagine, like, say they wanted to add new types of ship parts or new varieties of ship parts, like, a new gun manufacturer or a new type of laser or what have you. I mean, those things are going to be things they want to add to the game, I'm sure, because we're probably going to get a specific suite. I mean, they talk, you got the things from the various manufacturers now, Klaus and Wagner and such, but there's going to be situations where they want to expand that. And one of the ways they might do it is they're not just going to put out a patch note and say this is now available in ship stores. It might be something like, when you're doing that basic research, when they put something in the pipeline, this is now discoverable in the game, and there's a chance when you're doing different types of research that you'll come up with a new type of blueprint that you can sell, and now that's in the world. Like, players have to do the basic science research for one of those things to suddenly exist. It won't come out on its own. I could see that being a really cool aspect to the game, and obviously the person that finds it first might get a head start on being able to manufacture it, or his guild or organization would in that case. And then, of course, at some point, whether or not he sells it, it has to get out. It's going to get out. Somebody's going to blow up a ship that has the module on it, and they're going to salvage it, and it's going to get, to another group or an NPC or something, and eventually they have some system for it to make it to the wider world. That's how you introduce new things. I could see that being part of the science discovery route. That would be really interesting.
Yeah, that'd be. And the other thing is, it could also be independently discovered by another group.
Oh, that's
that happens
true.
In the real world all
and,
the time.
Yeah, if it doesn't spread fast enough, there's a higher and higher chance that another group figures it out, because obviously they have a working prototype, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. So then there's an idea of, do you want to maximize your profits and sell it early, and sell it, really high, or do you want to keep it secret for your guild and only get the benefits from it? But at some point, it's going to have to get out. Like, if you don't do it, someone else will, and you'll have missed your chance.
That's a really cool idea. So, anyway, any final comments you want to make on the Endeavor before we move on here?
I'm just excited.
Me too. I was like, man, we got nothing to talk about this week, and then they released the Endeavor and this design thing, and I'm like, bam, done. Thank you very much. In 2 weeks, please give us another awesome thing to talk about. Hopefully, the Star Marine module. Yeah. So. Let's move on. I want to talk about the concern of the week. For those of you not in the loop, there's a series of threads, a whole forum of threads on the RSI website called the Concern Forum, because they got so many people basically talking about things they had no idea about and having concerns about things based on information they didn't have, that they decided to just throw it all in one forum and then have people vote to see whether or not this is actually a concern the community has, or if there are just way too many of these crazy people out there that jump to conclusions with not enough data. So we start talking about the concerns of the week, which either are examples of really, really bad concerns that aren't concerns, or they're examples of concerns that actually have some merit. This week we have one that I think actually has some merit, and it's not even a concern thread. It's a link to a Redditor named HIA447, who was basically responding to somebody who said, the flight model of this game is awesome. And somebody else, HIA447, said, quote, "My feelings are kind of mixed. On the one hand, the physics-driven thruster system is really what sold me on the game, and I love the idea of it. On the other hand, a realistic physics-driven flight model requires a degree of practicality regarding the designs of the ship that, quite frankly, CIG really didn't pursue," unquote. The rest of his post elaborates on that point, which is they designed these ships to look cool, but then they built a system that needs them to function within an actual realistic physics model. And if you try to build a ship based in reality on real physics, what you get is something like the Star Fury in what is it called? In Babylon 5. I'll try to pull one up here for the people that are watching the YouTube, but if you're not familiar with it, it's essentially a and I can't type. Wow. Star Fury. It's essentially a ship that kind of in part looks a little bit like an X-Wing, and it is designed to have 8 thrusters very, very far away from the center of mass, so that if any one of them fires, you get the highest efficiency of the engine. Whereas, unfortunately, a lot of the ships that we have, the thrusters have to be very close to the center of mass, and you get, as a result, they have to make those thrusters extremely powerful to turn the ships, because they're trying to work with realistic physics. So this Star Fury from Babylon 5 was always sort of widely hailed as being a very realistic design for a space fighter, because of the way they took advantage of those large wings to get very high efficiency on your engines. So that sort of brings me back to you, Tim. I mean, you're obviously an astrophysicist. You're very big on CIG getting their physics wrong. What do you think about this? The rule of cool versus the realistic physics system?
And so, I mean, this neatly segues back into the point that we were making. I mean, this is what we're running as the overall topic for this PAX panel. Because it's not just a Star Citizen problem, it's a problem in lots and lots of gaming. As far as the need to be able to turn really, really quickly and efficiently, for a fighter, yeah, I fully agree. But most of the fighters that we have, and certainly the ones that we can currently fly in Arena Commander, they do have the thrusters, sufficiently far enough away from the center of mass for it to turn quickly and be relatively physically plausible, if not super realistic. They don't measure every part of physics, though, and they don't need to. That's where the rule of cool comes in. Like, we're not measuring the stress tensors across the length of the ship, for example. We're not looking at the moments of torque to see where the different amounts of stress are being applied to make sure that the ship isn't going to just tear itself apart when it turns. So once we start seeing the really, really big ships come in, I think that people are going to realize that not every ship can turn on a dime. Not every ship can maneuver really, really quickly, or in ways that are, you might expect it to. So once we start seeing, like, especially the whole series of ships with that tiny little thin spindle in the middle, like, you're just going to have to start to learn to deal with the way those ships maneuver, and the way that those ships maneuver, I think, will match the physics. Again, not accurately, but certainly close enough for it to feel realistic.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I think we'll definitely see that impact on the larger ships. They're not going to turn on a dime at all. They're going to probably, it's like turning a freaking, like, transport ship in real life. The concern that HIA 447 was putting out there was essentially the fact that, okay, we've designed these ships to look cool, but they don't fly well because we're using a realistic physics system, and they weren't designed practically. And maybe the ships...
I disagree that they don't fly well.
Okay, well, that's certainly the point of contention, is he thinks that they don't fly as well as they should be, and in part because the maneuvering thrusters have to be ludicrously powerful to unrealistic levels in order to make it work. And I think that's something I've observed, too. I agree with you that they fly well, but what he's saying is, you have to make the maneuvering thrusters ridiculous in order to make them fly well.
Yeah, I would go a step further, though. I think that some of the ships fly too well.
Ah, okay.
Like, way too well. I think that slowing down, and if you drop your thruster to 0, or you apply your space brake to try and stop hitting an asteroid, if you haven't changed your attitude or your orientation, you shouldn't be slowing down quickly. Like, you need to turn your butt around and get those big thrusters onto it.
We have discussed that you can stop with your forward thrusters just as quickly as you can accelerate with your rear thrusters, which doesn't make any sense at the moment.
No, and I think that people who... I know why it is currently the way it is, and again, these things are still up to change. The flight model is largely locked down, and Calix and a lot of the other guys have said this over and over again, that the flight model that we currently have is the flight model. But there will be tweaks to it, absolutely. And I can see the slowing down thing increasing in the future, if not the near future, certainly the sort of mid-future. As soon as 2.0 comes out, as soon as we get multi-crew out, so much of this is going to be, if it doesn't change, it'll at least be brought into context.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we'll have much bigger ships, so we'll see relatively what turning on a dime means as far like an M50 can just ridiculously spin around and do circles around you. And then how fast does a constellation turn in reality?
Yeah.
That
And
kind
also,
of a thing.
like some of the ships that are not constellation size, but those sort of like that halfway between, like the Cutlass-sized ships, we're going to start seeing the fact that the Cutlass can take both of its engines and just flip them around completely.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to make a huge difference in terms of how we compare these ships to each other. Like, you're going to see a ship that's roughly the size of the Cutlass that can't do that, and that ship is not going to be able to come to a stop or flip its orientation or rotate as anywhere near as fast as the Cutlass can.
The Cutlass is actually remarkably maneuverable for its size. I know a lot of people were complaining when it first came out, oh, so slow and all this other stuff. How could it possibly be a fighter? But I think you're exactly right. When you put it next to something like the Caterpillar, which is only a little bit bigger, I believe, it's going to look like a ballerina perfectly. I mean, that's why it's in the Cutlass commercial, they show it as maneuverable as it is, because it has all those very special maneuvering thrusters that allow you to apply this maximum thrust in ways that you normally wouldn't be able to on another ship.
Yeah, and we always get people as well coming to us and saying, should I melt this ship for this ship? Should I? Oh, there's a sale on this week. Should I should I trade in this one for this one? Should I buy this one in the first place? Is this one going to be better? And so many people reply saying, well, in the game at the moment, this ship is dominating the leaderboards. Like, that doesn't matter.
No, of course
You're looking at the wrong thing. You need to be looking at the way the ship was described in its original, either in its original sort of pledge run, or the way it's being described at the moment. So look at the things like the Cutlass video and see that they're really accentuating the agile, that solo lone wolf sort of nature of the ship. Well, even though it has 2 seats, like, they only show the one person in it, and they show that it's this really awesome, agile, fun, funky, really, capable and versatile ship. That's what you need to be looking at, not going, oh, well, it takes forever for it to spawn in because the LODs are not properly implemented, or, the turret doesn't work as well as it should at the moment, or there's weird clipping issues. Like, you need to ignore all of the stuff about the current implementation and just, like, look at how it's going to be incorporated into the game in comparison to the other ships.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It also in part because you have to trust in the developer in this kind of a case, that even if you got a Caterpillar, right? In AC 2.0, we get the Caterpillar. I'm guessing we're going to get the Caterpillar eventually, right? So, and it turns out that, it doesn't carry as much as people wanted it to, or it doesn't do this, or it doesn't do that, and it doesn't play well, and, you have to trust that CIG is going to recognize that there is a problem. Hey, the ship doesn't perform the role that we said it was going to perform. We have to fix that, right? If you get into, the Mustang and, when we get to AC 3.0, it doesn't fulfill the role of a light fighter, then there's a problem there. If the problem is it doesn't fulfill the role of a light fighter as well as this more expensive light fighter, well, okay, that's the point, right? I mean, the Kar-2-Al is a light fighter, but it's got all this fancy, Xi'an technology in it. So it makes sense that it would be more maneuverable than a Mustang. I'm just making stuff up here because I don't know if exactly that's how those are going to work, but I'm just trying to give an example, right? Is as long as you trust that CIG is going to make the ship as they've described it, and to be fair, some ships have changed over time, and their roles have morphed a little bit, but that's why they allow you to melt your ships right now, because they understand they're going to have to make changes. It occurred to me, though, if CIG was really, truly evil, they would put a small melting fee on there. Like, if you're going to melt your stuff down, you'll get 98% of your original. Because I have to imagine there's people that change their mind every week and they go, no, I'm going to melt all my ships and I'm going to get an interest. No, I'm going to melt all this and I'm going to get a fleet of these things. Like, they just have, they must do that all the time. And if now they implemented a small fee of 2% to melt and transfer, they would just make millions. I guarantee it. We'd go up to 100 million in no time.
And so, I mean, there has been a concern thread recently as well about the fact that there is a fee if you are going to downgrade in the new cross chassis system. Because the idea at the moment is that with the new system, you don't have to melt just for pure cash credits and then redistribute the way you want. The new CCU is going to allow you to switch from ship to ship specifically, and then whatever aggregate left over just gets funded back into your account, or you pay the extra. And the fee there is to facilitate the fact that at the moment in the game, especially, it's fine if you want to melt backwards and forwards. It's not going to make a difference, really. But once your ability to change ship and say, oh, wait, no, I don't have that ship at all. Let's retcon everything and say that this whole time I've had this other ship. That is going to start changing the way that the balance of people's fleets starts to, come into play. So that, excuse me, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. Somebody in the chat, Lord Inquisitor, said Xi'an Scout. This is the Kar-2 Al, which is a Xi'an-designed ship, and they sold these very limited design, very sort of a limited concept sale a while back. And this is another one of those that the engine can sort of flip around in many different ways, and as a result, it's got a lot of special Xi'an technology. The Xi'an are one of the races that have contact with humans in the Star Citizen universe. You have the Xi'an and you have the Banu are the two main ones, and then also the Tevarin, which we've almost genocided at this point. We've integrated some of them into our society, but there was a real big war. Yeah. So yeah, the Tevarin are the third, but much less. They're not really a force anymore because we beat them in a big war that they started after we took their planet. So they kind of had justification. But anyway, there's some cool stuff in the lore if you want to learn more about that. And then, of course, there's the evil Kilrathi. I mean, Vanduul. Sorry, getting my universes mixed there. So anyway, we're coming up on 8 o'clock here. I know Tim has to get to work, so I'm going to wrap it up. Any final thoughts on what we were discussing here about the rule versus cool or flight model taking precedence here?
No, again, just wait. Just wait and see.
Wait. That's good.
Yeah, 2.0 is going to change so much. As soon as multi-crew comes out, you can start to actually fly some of these larger ships. Everything's going to start crystallizing into focus. This is an age-old problem in science as well. If you don't have the right dynamic range, you can't make any sensible observations about anything. It's just simply not possible. So until we have something to compare things against, you just don't know, what the current situation actually is. You're only looking at this one tiny portion. It's not, a homogeneous aliquot. So you're looking at one small situation. You need to be able to compare it against the whole thing. So wait for 2.0.
Wait for 2.0.
Keep putting the concern threads out if you want. That's fine.
Sure.
We don't mind. Internet's free. Electrons are free mostly.
There you go. So yeah, I definitely think that it's something to. It's in a very early stage. Most games you do not see the sausage being made, and that's what we're seeing here for all intents and purposes, right? We're seeing the paths that they go down that turn out not to work quite well. And so they go down a different path. And then we're like, well, why do you keep changing your mind? Clearly you don't know what you're doing. No, that's what every game development studio does. They try something out, and sometimes it works in the first try, and sometimes it doesn't. But they eventually get it, right? That's why you do that.
It's a process.
It's a process. And if it's really something that's driving you insane, just take a couple months off and come back. It'll be better later. Okay, here's a cat to wish us goodbye. All right. All right, cat. Welcome to the world, the tales of Luca, the cat. I am Bridger signing off. Again, reminder, we have Tales of Tyria next week. And every other week, we're going to alternate Tales of Tyria and Tales of Citizens. And we'll hope to see you in Guild Wars 2. We're on Northern Shiver Peaks, and Legacy is recruiting if you wanted to join us. Have a good one, everybody. Bridger signing off. Whoops. That button made something happen that was not supposed to happen. We were at the big finish. And so I said goodbye, and then I turned it up. There we are. Watch out for this ugly Kilrathi. Ah, ferocious. All right. Anyway, thanks, Tim, for coming on. We didn't have Callie or Gray available this week. They're both unavailable. Callie, if you recall, just had a child just recently. And Gray was unable to join us because he's got a Sounders game tonight. Yeah, so that was a good show. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks or next week. If you are enjoying Guild Wars 2, we'd like to have you watch our Tales of Tyria show, which was a Guild Wars 2 podcast that we ran for 60-some-odd episodes back in the day when Guild Wars was brand new. And we really enjoyed it, and we're getting all pumped for the expansion. So hope to see you
Yeah,
over
I'll actually
there.
have to reinstall now.
Yeah, they've made
was
some
a really
interesting
great
changes. It is a really great game, and World vs. World is still fun, still quite fun, and we're getting all excited about the changes in World vs. World for the expansion. What is this? Oh, that's right. That's what that is. I didn't know why that was in my Winamp. I was like, oh, yes, I was listening to that. Okay, well, thanks, guys, for watching, and have a good night.
See you around.